welcome back, guys. All right, so we are on chapter 8. Alrighty. I apologize beforehand if there's a lot of background noise. There's a whole lot going on outside tonight, but I'll try to ignore it. Okay, so chapter 8. On the suffering of his body, of how he became a monk in the monastery of St. Denis, and Eloise, a nun at Argentia. When morning came, the whole city was assembled before my dwelling. It is difficult, nay, impossible, for words of mine to describe the amazement which bewildered them, the lamentations they uttered, the uproar with which they harassed me, or the grief with which they increased my own suffering. Chiefly the clerics, and above all my scholars, tortured me with their intolerable lamentations and outcries, so that I suffered more intensely from their compassion than from the pain of my wound. In truth, I felt the disgrace more than the hurt to my body, and was more afflicted with shame than with pain. My incessant thought was of the renown in which I had so much delighted, now brought low, nay, utterly blotted out, so swiftly by an evil chance. I saw, too, how justly God had punished me in that very part of my body whereby I had sinned. I perceived that there was indeed justice in my betrayal by him who I had myself already betrayed. And then I thought how eagerly my rivals would seize upon this manifestation of justice, how this disgrace would bring bitter and enduring grief to my kindred and my friends, and how the tale of this amazing outrage would spread to the very ends of the earth. What path lay open to me thereafter? How could I ever hold up my head among men, when every finger should be pointing at me in scorn, every tongue speak my blistering shame, and when I should be a monstrous spectacle to all eyes? I was overwhelmed by the remembrance that, according to the dread letter of law, God holds eunuchs in such abomination that men thus maimed are forbidden to enter a church, even as the unclean and filthy. Nay, even the beasts in such plight were not acceptable as sacrifices. Thus, in Leviticus 24, it is said, Ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which has ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which hath its stones bruised, or crushed, or broken, or cut. And in Deuteronomy 1, he that is wounded in the stones, or hath his privy member cut off, shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. I must confess that in my misery, it was the overwhelming sense of my disgrace, rather any ardor for conversation to the religious life, that drove me to seek the seclusion of the monastic cloister. Heloise had already, at my bidding, taken the veil and entered the convent. Thus it was that we both put on the sacred garb. I in the abbey of St. Denis, and she in the convent of Argentia, of which I have already spoken. She, I remember well, when her fond friends sought vainly to deter her from submitting her fresh youth to the heavy and almost intolerable yoke of monastic life. Sobbing and sweeping, replied in the words of Cornelia, O husband most noble, who ne'er shouldst have shared my couch, has fortune such power to smite such a lofty head? Why then was I wedded only to bring thee to woe? Receive now my sorrow, the price I so gladly pay. Lucan Pharsalia 94. With these words on her lips, did she go forthwith to the altar, and lifted therefrom the veil which had been blessed by the bishop, and before them all she took the vows of the religious life. For my part, scarcely had I recovered from my wound when clerics sought me in great numbers, endlessly beseeching both my abbot and me myself that now, since I was done with learning for the sake of gain or renown, I should turn to it for the sole love of God. They bade me care diligently for the talent which God had committed to my keeping. Matthew 15. Since surely he would demand it back from me with interest. It was their plea that, inasmuch of old I had labored chiefly in behalf of the rich, I should now devote myself to the teaching of the poor. Therein, above all, should I receive how it was the hand of God that had touched me, when I should devote my life to the study of letters in freedom from the snares of the flesh and withdrawn from the tumultuous life of this world. Thus, in truth, should I become a philosopher, less of this world than of God. The abbey, however, to which I had betaken myself, was utterly worldly, and its life quite scandalous. The abbot himself was far below his fellows in his way of living and in the foulness of his reputation, as he was above them in priestly rank. This intolerable state of things I often and vehemently denounced, sometimes in private talk and sometimes publicly. But the only result was that I made myself detested of them all. They gladly lay hold of the daily eagerness of my students to hear me as an excuse whereby they might be rid of me. And finally, at the insistent urging of the students themselves, and with the hearty consent of the abbot and the rest of the brotherhood, I departed thence to a certain hut, there to teach in my wonted way. To this place such a throng of students flocked that the neighborhood could not afford shelter for them, nor the earth sufficient sustenance. Here, as befitted my profession, I devoted myself chiefly to lectures on theology, but I did not wholly abandon the teachings of the secular arts, to which I was more accustomed, and which was particularly demanded of me. I used the latter, however, as a hook, luring my students by the bait of learning to the study of the true philosophy. Don't mind her, my little girl. Sleepy. I used the latter, however, as a hook, luring my students by the bait of learning to the study of the true philosophy, even as the ecclesiastical history of Origen, the greatest of all Christian philosophers. I'm going to read that again. That sounds. I used the latter, however, as a hook, luring my students by the bait of learning to the study of the true philosophy, even as the Ecclesiastical history tells of Origen, the greatest of all Christian philosophers. Since apparently the Lord had gifted me with no less persuasiveness in expounding the scriptures than in lecturing on secular subjects, the number of my students in these two courses began to increase greatly, and the attendance at all other schools was correspondingly diminished. Thus I aroused the envy and hatred of the other teachers, those who sought to belittle me in every possible way, took advantage of my absence to bring two principal charges against me. First, that it was contrary to the monastic profession to be concerned with the study of secular books. And second, that I had presumed to teach theology without ever having been taught therein myself. This they did in order that my teaching of every kind might be prohibited. And to this end, they continually stirred up bishops, archbishops, abbots, and whatever other dignitaries of the church they could reach. Chapter 9. Of his book on theology and his persecution at the hands of his fellow students, of the council against him. Excuse me, don't mind me. So graceful, wasn't it? Okay. I'm winded. Chapter 9. It so happened that at the outset I devoted myself to analyzing the basis of our faith through illustrations based on human understanding. And I wrote for my students a certain tract on the unity and Trinity of God. This I did because they were always seeking for rational and philosophical explanations, asking rather for reasons they could understand than for mere words, saying that it was futile to utter words which the intellect could not possibly follow, that nothing could be believed unless it could first be understood, and that it was absurd for anyone to preach to others a thing which neither he himself nor those whom he sought to teach could comprehend. Our Lord himself maintained the same thing when he said, "They are blind leaders of the blind." Matthew 14. Now, a great many people saw and read this tract, and it became exceedingly popular, its clearness appealing particularly to all who sought information on the subject. And since the questions involved are generally considered the most difficult of all, their complexity is taken as the measure of the subtlety of him who succeeds in answering them. As a result, my rivals became furiously angry and summoned a council to take action against me, the chief investigators therein being my two intriguing enemies of former days, Alberic and Lotolf. These two, now that both William and Anselm, our erstwhile teachers, were dead, were greedy to reign in their stead, and, so to speak, to succeed them as heirs. While they were directing the school at Reims, Rheims, IMs. IMS. Rhymes. Sorry. While they were directing the school at Rhymes, they managed by repeating hints to stir up their Archbishop Rodolph against me for the purpose of holding a meeting, or rather an ecclesiastical council at Soissons, provided they could secure the approval of Conon, Bishop of Praeneste, Praeneste, Praeneste. At that time, the papal legate in France. Their plan was to summon me to be present at this council, bringing with me the famous book I had written regarding the Trinity. In all this, indeed, they were successful, and the thing happened according to their wishes. Before I reached Science, however, these two rivals of mine so foully slandered me with both the clergy and the public that on the day of my arrival, the people came near to stoning me, and the few students of mine who had accompanied me thither. The cause of their anger was that they had been led to believe that I had preached and written to prove the existence of three gods. No sooner had I reached the city, therefore, than I went forthwith to the legate. To him I submitted my book for examination and judgment, declaring that if I had written anything repugnant to the Catholic faith, I was quite ready to correct it or otherwise to make satisfactory amends. The legate directed me to refer my book to the archbishop and to those same two rivals of mine, to the end that my accusers might also be my judges. So in my case was fulfilled the saying, even our enemies are our judges. Deuteronomy 31. These three then took my book and pawed it over and examined it minutely, but could find nothing therein which they dared to use as the basis for a public accusation against me. Excuse me. Accordingly, they put off the condemnation of the book until the close of the council, despite their eagerness to bring it about. For my part, every day before the council convened, I publicly discussed the Catholic faith in the light of what I had written, and all who heard me were enthusiastic in their approval alike of the frankness and the logic of my words. When the public and the clergy had thus learned something of the real character of my teaching, they began to say to one another, "Behold, now he speaks openly, and no one brings any charge against him. And this council, summoned, as we have heard, chiefly to take action upon his case, is drawing towards its end. Did the judges realize that the error might be theirs rather than his?" As a result of all this, my rivals grew more angry day by day. On one occasion, Alberic, accompanied by some of his students, came to me for the purpose of intimidating me, and after a few bland words, said that he was amazed at something he had found in my book, to the effect that, although God had begotten God, I denied that God had begotten himself, since there was only one God. I answered unhesitatingly, "I can give you an explanation of this if you wish." "Nay," he replied, I care nothing for human explanation or reasoning in such matters, but only for the words of authority. Very well, I said. Turn the pages of my book and you will find the authority likewise. The book was the book was at hand, for he had brought it with him. I turned to the passage I had in mind, which he had either not discovered or else passed over as containing nothing injurious to me. And it was God's will that I quickly found what I sought. This was the following sentence under the heading Augustine on the Trinity, Book 1. Whomever believes that it is within the power of God to beget himself is sorely in error. This power is not in God, neither is it in any created thing, spiritual or corporeal. There is nothing that can give birth to itself. When those of his followers who were present heard this, they were amazed and much embarrassed. He himself, in order to keep his countenance, said, "Certainly I understand all that." Then I added, "What I have to say further on this subject is by no means new, but apparently it has nothing to do with the case at issue. Since you have asked for the word of authority only, and not for explanations." Oh, wait, I'm going to read that again. What I have to say further on this subject is by no means new, but apparently it has nothing to do with the case at issue, since you have asked for the word of authority only, and not for explanations. If, however, you care to consider logical explanations, I am prepared to demonstrate that, according to Augustine's statement, you have yourself fallen into a heresy in believing that a father can possibly be his own son. When Alberic heard this, he was almost beside himself with rage, and straightway resorted to threats, asserting that neither my explanations nor my citations of authority would avail me aught in his case. With this, he left me. On the last day of the council, before the session convened, the legate and the archbishop deliberated with my rivals and sundry others as to what should be done about me and my book, this being the chief reason for their having come together. And since they had discovered nothing either in my speech or in what I had hitherto written which would give them a case against me, they were all reduced to silence, or at the most to malign me in whispers. Then Geoffroy, Bishop of Chartres, oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this so bad. Chartres, 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 Bishop Chartres, who excelled the other bishops alike in the sincerity of his religion and in the importance of his see, spoke thus. You know, my lords, all who gathered here, the doctrine of this man. You know, my lords, all who are gathered here, the doctrine of this man, what it is, and his ability, which has brought him many followers in every field to which he has devoted himself. You know how greatly he has lessened the renown of other teachers.